It's usually me, it's nobody else, so I always want to check. My name is Pastor Michael. I am the lead pastor here at Long Hill, and I'm just so glad you're here. Hey, it looks great in here, and it looks great on this property. I want to thank our facility care team for all that they've done just to really celebrate Easter with us. But you know, the other reason it looks great is because you look great. You got your kids out of the house. They're not wearing sweatpants, most of them, but you guys look great. And to kind of celebrate that, and so you can have a memento that it is actually possible. That's how it is in our family. We have a photo booth set up in the lobby, right out the double doors, straight out to the center there. And we'd love, if you want a family picture, most of you all have cell phones. We have a team out there that would be happy to take your picture as many times as is necessary. I have two little boys, and so what we do is we just machine gun the pictures, and we do like 50 of them, and maybe one of them actually turns out to be halfway decent. So just feel free afterwards, or we'd just love to take a picture, and that can be your new Facebook profile picture. It can be the one that you send to your parents or your family to prove that, yes, you do dress up really well, and we just want to celebrate Easter with you. You know, this day is about a lot of things. It's about the Easter Bunny. It's about baskets. I always used to love coming downstairs as a kid, and my parents really did that up well, and so we always had tons of candy. And some of you were at our Easter egg hunt, and your kids, they were on the roof for the rest of the day because of the sugar, and then they crashed. But it's about that. It's baskets, it's bunnies, and after this, many of you, including me, are going to head off to the other thing that begins with a B, and that's brunch. So baskets, bunnies, and brunch. And these are all wonderful things. We celebrate together as families. But this day, this holiday, this Easter Sunday, this Resurrection Day is so much more than even those good things. You know, one of the things that happens with me is I am always a very late adopter when it comes to TV shows. I'm the person who, everybody is into the thing, and then 6 months later, Michael shows up to the thing, and, it's have you seen The Last of Us, or, have you seen Cobra Kai, or whatever it is, and everybody else just rolls their eyes, because that was, so back there, but it's the thing that's currently changing my life. And one of the things that is true with me is that I see these things come on, and I just kind of ignore them because I don't think they matter, but then everybody around me is impacted and affected by them. And today, as we close out our series, Resurrection Encounters, which really has just been this journey of the people that Jesus met after he rose from the dead, and the fact that this reality was the thing that literally changed everything for the early followers of Jesus. They would be, because of this, they were the people who, when everybody else was running out, they were running in. They were the ones who paid an incredible price, sometimes with their very lives, for this reality. And if it just had been a manufactured thing, many people will suffer a little bit for something, but they're not going to give their lives for it. And so this utterly transformed those early followers of Jesus. It transformed the world around us. And the thing that I believe is that it can transform us as well. And so today, we finish out our series, we celebrate Easter with one of these other resurrection encounters, and it's with a couple of characters who were the late adopters. They are the ones who showed up later to this reality. And so today, we're going to read in the Gospel of Luke, and a gospel is just an account of the life and the work of Jesus. The Gospel of Luke, who's written by a guy, incidentally, named Luke, in chapter 24 at verse 13 to 35. Now the same day, two of them, and that's two of his disciples, were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was where all the events of the crucifixion of Jesus and then the resurrection and all of those surrounding things that we remember at Easter occurred. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And the thing that's important for us to remember is that in this moment, this is a very confusing time for them. There's two disciples of Jesus. They're kind of walking home. One of them is possibly the guy who wrote this book, Luke the author. And they're both sad, and they're kind of confused. It's sad because it seems like it's over. It's important for us to realize that these early followers of Jesus who had journeyed with him for 3.5 years, who were with him, they didn't really know what had happened. They weren't like, he has risen indeed. They weren't there yet. They were confused by what was going on. It seemed like their hope had been crucified on a cross and buried in a tomb. And this one, Jesus, who had performed so many great works, had performed so many miracles, it seemed like there was no miracle for the one who had performed all those miracles. But it was a confusing time because there were some stories that were beginning to circulate. There are these reports trickling in that the tomb that Jesus had been buried in and laid in was found empty. There were some who thought the body had been stolen, adding insult to injury. But there was also this story about this angel who had been there, who was telling the people that Jesus was alive. And some of their friends had seen this too. And as they're walking the 7 miles from Jerusalem back to this town called Emmaus, you can't help but wonder, as they reflected on these, they were asking the same questions you and I would ask when we're faced with our hopes that seem like they have come to an end. Was it just wishful thinking? It was just this misplaced thing? Or was something more going on? And with this backdrop, they're headed away from where it had all happened. The story continues. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked them, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And Jesus kind of, he plays like he doesn't know. He says, "What things?" he asked. As they journey along, the stranger, this one, they don't recognize him at first. And some of that may have been because they were prevented from doing so. Some of that may have been just because they didn't believe that this was possible. Their faces downcast. In the original language, that means miserable. It means a broken spirit. When something's broken, it's no longer working. The thing that they had built their lives around seemed like it was broken down. And suddenly, all of us in this room can relate to that story. Because we've all had a time, not just where we had a bad week, not where things were just difficult, but where it just seemed like it was absolutely broken. You've had a relationship where it just wasn't like you're going through a rough patch. We all have those. But where it was just broken. Something you worked for, that you sacrificed for, that you put your whole heart into, that you put both feet into, came to an end, and it seemed like it was broken. And I think the thing that's interesting in this moment is very often when we come to those moments in our lives, it feels like we're the ones who have to crawl our way back to God. We have to crawl our way back to hope. We have to crawl our way out. We have to put one foot in front of the other, and we have to try to pick up the pieces and make some kind of sense of everything that's happened. But look what happens in this broken moment. Jesus comes, and he walks with them. He enters into their moment. He enters into that. They don't have to go find him. He finds them. And wherever you are on this journey of faith today, maybe you're on it. Maybe, you're here because it's Easter, and we're so glad that you're here for whatever reason you're here. Jesus wants to meet you where you are. And Jesus starts out, he gets them to describe, to tell the story in their own words. To tell what they're experiencing, to tell what they've seen, to tell even the things that they're feeling in the depths of their being. He doesn't just come in and tell them what to do. He starts with where they are. And I believe that Jesus does the same thing with you and I. He's not just being clever. He's not just pretending just to play the fool. He's inviting relationships with them. And sometimes the best thing that we can do, the best thing that you and I can do with other people around is not to just provide an answer, but to just provide understanding. Some of us in this room, I'm like one of these people. It's like I always want to have a solution when it seems like there's something wrong. It's like, here's the 3 things you need to do to fix wherever you are. And the people around me, they're like, no, just settle down. Like, we don't need that right now. We just need you to be with us. That's what Jesus starts with. That's where he begins. And so they begin describing all of the things that have happened. And the passage goes on. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was, notice the word, he was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. Listen to this verse. But we had hoped that he was to be the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what's more, the 3rd day since all this took place, in addition, some of our women amazed us. They're the ones who went to the tomb first. They went to the tomb early in the morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he came and that he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and they found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. If you were here last week, we had this phrase, Jesus meets you where you are, but then he takes you somewhere. He doesn't leave you where you are. And so Jesus he interrupts almost, and it's almost abrupt, and it seems like, not a great way to respond to something like that. Listen to what he says. He says, how foolish you are and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? Before the events of the crucifixion and the resurrection, Jesus had said kind of over and over again that these were the things that were going to happen. And because almost they had, the followers of Jesus had their own vision of things, they almost just didn't want to see it. They kind of tuned it out. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. So he kind of goes back and says it again. Now, mind you, these 2 who are on this road to Emmaus, they're very close to Jesus. They had been hanging out with him for 3 years. They'd heard him say these things. They almost certainly knew all of those Old Testament scriptures that he was going to say that Jesus used. And he uses this word that sounds harsh. It sounds difficult. He calls them foolish. But that word, it doesn't mean stupid. This is like when your kid is smart, but he chooses poorly. Many of us can relate to that. Like, your kid is smart, your children are smart, but they just make the wrong decisions. And so this isn't like this intellectual assessment. It's a moral pronouncement. And there's something we can all take away from this, regardless of where you are in your journey of faith. It's this: big feelings can blur bigger truths. Big feelings can blur bigger truths. There's this almost movement in our world that what you feel is what is true. And that is not true. Because there are some things that are true regardless of how we feel. And sometimes we feel these things, and I'll start with myself, that they obscure what is actually true. What is actually true. When we're very close to our present experiences and circumstances, and when our feelings are high, they have this way of disconnecting us from the larger truth. And so Jesus brings them back, and he begins to reconnect them, not just to what they felt, and they've been through some stuff, but to what's actually true. The story goes on. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over." And so we went in to stay with them. And so Jesus doesn't invite himself in. Jesus doesn't superimpose himself. He doesn't force himself on them. He waits. He waits for an invitation. And friends, this morning, this Easter 2025, he waits for your invitation. He waits for you to not only meet him, but to invite him in. And so he's invited in, and they did what anyone would do in that moment after a long journey. They sat at the table, and they began to share a meal together. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. And this, if you've been around church or this story for any length of time, this is an exact parallel to this event that had happened just a little bit before called the Last Supper. It was the day before Jesus was crucified, where he sat at a table with his disciples. And some of us are familiar with that famous painting of the Last Supper that we've seen. And he sits here and he starts to do some of the same things, and suddenly they begin to connect the dots. Suddenly it all begins to make sense to them. Suddenly their eyes are open to him. So Jesus opens our eyes to see him where we didn't recognize him before. And maybe some of you today, you have heard this story before. You know the story. You come to church every year and you're like, it's the same story. This is one of those days when you come into church, you have no question what me or the person who would be in this spot right now is going to talk about. There's no surprises. Like, we're not going to just pull one over on you where it's like, I didn't expect him to talk about that. It's always about this story and this reality on Easter. But maybe today is the day where Jesus wants to open your eyes. And this isn't just this story that we hear. It's something that can become a reality. It's something that can begin to change us. It can not only change our lives, it can change our destiny here and forever in eternity. It can be the thing that begins to, as we go into a world where there's difficulty, where there's suffering, where there's so many questions, especially at a time like the time we live in, it can become an anchor for us in the times of storm, the mountaintops, and the valleys. You know, very often, we look for God in the extraordinary. We look for God in these big things. But I love that their eyes are opened in this very mundane thing, in the meal that they shared together. And all of us have lots of meals throughout the course of our lives. And so in this very mundane moment, this is where Jesus shows himself. Often when our lives feel like they're just not working the way we wanted them to. I'm approaching midlife, and I haven't wanted to buy like a sports car yet, but it could possibly be coming. Because what happens is at some point we've done all the things. We've advanced in our careers. We've gotten the family and the kids and the house and the possessions, and we've taken the station in life. And the first half of our lives is always about going after those things. And by the way, those are not bad things. Those are good things. But at some point, we begin to recognize that those aren't ultimate things. There will always be something else. There will always be another rung on the ladder. There will always be a different neighborhood that we could move into. There will always be something else that tries and attempts and promises us meaning in our lives. But at some point, we run to the end. We run to the boundary of that thing. So that's how we just do life. It's how all of us are wired by default. But what if instead we prayed for new eyes? What if we began to ask God to see him and to see things differently than we'd seen them before? This is one of the great themes of the Bible throughout it, especially where we're talking about it in the New Testament. One of the other writers in the Bible, the Apostle Paul, he says this in the book of Ephesians. He says, I pray that the eyes of your heart would be opened, that they'd be enlightened, that you'd see differently, that you would know the hope to which you are called. And so it's not like we have to find a new thing. It's not like we have to go find something that we didn't find before. We didn't have to discover before. It is this thing that is in front of us that if we will have new eyes to see it, it will change us forever. That's the thing with Easter. I think there's very few of you who don't know, at least in the general outline of things, what this story is about. You haven't heard anything that surprised you yet, but can you see it? Do you know it? Not just intellectually, not just because there's always someone up here on Easter Sunday who kind of says the same story and the same things. Can you truly comprehend? Will it change you? And then in the story, Jesus does this thing it seems like he does a lot. He disappears. He disappears from their sight, and they're left around this table with the bread in front of them, with the light waning on the horizon as the sun sets. And they look at each other, and they've become aware, and they begin to ask questions. They ask each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? Some of you, your hearts are beginning to burn right now, and not because of what you ate for breakfast. But there's something within you that's beginning to pique your interest, that's beginning to draw you, and that is God himself. So what do you do with that? What do you do with a burning heart? Whatever it's for, some of us, there's this thing that motivates us, that gets us up, that catches our interest. Maybe, you started a relationship and your heart was burning in the best way. Or there was some opportunity, or there was something that just captured your passion, it captured your heart. What do you do with that? You don't sit around with it. It begins to move you, it begins to motivate you, and it begins to transform you. But it always does that with a destination that is somewhere else. So it always begins to move you in a direction. You don't just stay where you are, literally or figuratively, when that begins to happen. It begins to move you somewhere, and that's what happens to these two followers of Jesus. Verse 33, they got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. Couple key facts, 7 miles away and it's dark. So they got up at once. They're the ones who it's getting dark. We need to stop somewhere. We need to get some food. We just need to call it a night. But this reality gets them up. It points them back to where they came. And they travel this 7-mile journey in the dark. And that's not just okay, I'm going to go get in the car and I'm going to drive. We all do that. There's no lights. It's difficult. There's potential danger. But they go back from where they came. It says they got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11, that's the rest of the disciples, and those with them assembled together, saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen, and he has appeared to Simon," that's Peter, who's one of the disciples, one of the most well-known followers of Jesus. Then the two told them what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when they broke the bread. And so these two in this story, the central characters in this story, they've walked from Jerusalem 7 dusty, depressing, discouraged miles. And they've been walking away from everything that they had built their lives around for 3.5 years. Everything that they believed. They were tired just like you and I would be. They're confused and they're grieving. And in that moment and in that setting, they encountered Jesus. And when they realized who he was, their hearts begin to burn within them. Their eyes begin to be opened. They don't wait. They go back. They don't say, let's rest. Let's call it a night. We'll get up in the morning. We'll do it. They run that same 7 miles back in the dark. Why? Because when you encounter the risen Jesus, you don't stay where you are. When you encounter the risen Jesus, you don't stay where you are in life. When you encounter the risen Jesus, you don't stay the same way that you are. You go back. Your heart is burning within you. First of all, it reconnects you with God. But then once it's done that story begins to go outward. You run back into a life that has purpose. A life that has meaning, a life where you've tried to fill that hole and fill that role and fill that space with so many other things as we are so wont to do here where we live. And instead, it's filled with something so much greater. The road to Emmaus was a road of grief, but the road back to Jerusalem is a road of resurrection. Maybe that's your story too. Maybe that could be your story today. Jesus meets you right where you are. Whether you're in the mountaintop of life and some of us are there, whether you're deep in the valley, and there's some of us who are there too, whether you're just doing the next thing, the next day, the next year, the next objective, you're putting one foot in front of the other the best way that you can, Jesus meets you there as well. And maybe as he encounters you, he sends you from that place not weary, but as a witness. You know, yesterday here in New Jersey was an absolutely beautiful day. It was one of those days where you're like, there is hope. Because we've had, some rain and a little bit of snow, and it's been cold, and I love to be outside, and it's been really difficult. I went outside and I walked 18,500 steps yesterday, 8.5 miles, something like that, because I just love being outside. But I have a couple little kids, and we live next door to our neighbors who are some of our dearest friends, and they have some little kids too. And a few years ago in the back of my house, I had this patio built, and one of the things I wanted in it was I wanted a built-in fire pit. And so we have one of those. And it's amazing what happens. I'm the fire builder. I'm the one who's figured out how to do that, and I'm pretty good at it at this point, if I say so myself. But I built a fire as the temperature began to drop a little bit, as the sun began to go down. And there's this amazing thing that happens when you do that. People just begin to gather. My kids start looking for sticks to burn in the fire because that's how we roll. No one got burned. It was a good day. But people just are drawn to the light, to the heat, to the place where they can gather. And when you have a burning heart, it's just like that. It's light. It's heat. It's unmistakable. You can see it even as the world feels like it's so dark at times. Even when your circumstances feel that way. There's something that lights up the world. And maybe this Easter, that's what you need, is a burning heart. Just like these early followers of Jesus. Maybe it's for the first time. It's a new passion or reignited one. To first receive, but then to share. To first receive, but then to share everything you've seen and you've heard, because it lights up the world. It's light to see all the circumstances of your life by, and it draws in others. So we close today, this Easter 2025. Maybe this is where you meet Jesus for the first time. You've heard the story, you kind of know the outline of it, but this is the place and the moment where it becomes real. Where it doesn't just be this thing that's facts and figures and anecdotes and interesting ideas, it begins to change you. Maybe this is where your heart is ignited for the very first time. Maybe some of you, you've been coming to church for a long time and you've heard the story, and you come here on Easter, and you dress up, you go to brunch afterwards, and all those are great things. But maybe this is the day where your heart can be reignited. And you can take that light and that heat and that warmth back into the place. The flame that has dimmed and it has kind of burned down a little bit can be rekindled. To encounter Jesus, the risen Jesus, not just as a historical figure or as a moral teacher, but as a resurrected Savior. What will your resurrection encounter today lead to? Where will it take you? What might the journey in front of you look like if you'll just let your heart be ignited? Would you pray with me? Jesus, we come to you. Some of us are right there in the story, and some of us just aren't sure, but we feel this thing within us. Our hearts are burning. And so I pray that you'd open our eyes, not just to hear the story, but to embrace the reality. Maybe some of us for the very first time. And so if this is your first time where this has become real to you, where it's come home to you, where your heart has been ignited by it, I'd invite you to pray a prayer just like this. Jesus, I receive you today. as my Savior and my Lord. I confess my sin, knowing that you died for me and you rose again. I receive the hope that you offer me. And I set out on the journey that you have before me into life everlasting. For the rest of us who know the story, but the flame is dimmed down, I pray that this would be the day, this would be the moment where Jesus rekindles it again. It burns high and bright and warm, and it begins to draw all the people around us. And it burns in a dark place that needs the light more than ever before. It gives us light to walk by. But it shows us the path to others. And so I thank you for all that you're doing in this moment, on this day. And I pray these things in Jesus' name.